one. This is sort of an interactive, so while Jim and I will wait around to the end, if you do have a question, just raise your hand and we'll try and answer. If it's a really specific question that you have about your family, then we might circle back and just address it one-on-one at the end. My name is Monty Niddle. This is Jim Curran. We work at Harbor Investment Advisory. Like many of you in the room, I'm also the parent of a child with both physical and mental disabilities. And really, that's why I got into this business. Prior to going to Harbor and working with Jim, I worked for Legg Mason and a couple big companies, on the institutional side of investments, which is just designing portfolios for high net worth individuals. And really, just out of more luck than anything else, 7-8 years ago, my wife and I went back and had our wills redone, and the lawyer asked what we were doing about our daughter Katie, and we told him, and he said, all right, let's get you straightened out. And so we had a special needs trust set up, and figured here, if I'm a professional in the world, I didn't know what to do for my family. There had to be sort of a need in the public for other families, so it kind of segued over from where I was to Morgan Stanley. And at Morgan Stanley, I was able to address this market, and been working with Jim for a little over 5 years. And let me introduce my partner, Jim Curran.
Hi, yes, my name is Jim Curran, and I'm a certified financial planner, and I've been doing this kind of work for 30 years. I do financial planning for families, and Monty and I, about 5 years ago, decided to focus specifically on financial plannings for families with a child with disabilities. And I do not have a child with disabilities, and so how did I get interested in this area? And I did have a very best friend that was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. He became 100% disabled, and I became the trustee for his special needs trust. And thus my entree into learning all about this specific area. Monty and I came together to start working on this when we were he came to the company I'd been to for a long time, and I had expressed to our manager that I was interested in this, and lo and behold, this new guy comes into the company and he has an interest, so we teamed up. And so that's a little bit about me and how I got here. Where's the, yeah. Oh, excuse me. We were at Morgan Stanley for a very long time, all right? And last March, Monty and I moved to Harbor Investment Advisory. And Harbor Investment Advisory is an independent, small investment management firm. We found that there was a lot more flexibility without going into detail. It would have taken months to get this presentation approved by the attorneys. All right, we walk down the hall at our new firm and say, this is what we'd like to present, and it's pretty promptly approved. So we're really happy at our new firm. Anyway, so.
Before we start, we did include an evaluation sheet. Jim and I looked at this very closely. If you have comments, critiques, please feel free to put them down. At the bottom, we do have a list. We do have an email list that we have strictly for parents and a couple other items. Any of this information, we're not going to contact you if you don't want us to contact you, but it is information, it's when we're putting on a parent's hat, that if we see something we think parents in the community would find of interest, that's what that newsletter is about. So without further ado, Jim.
All right. So this is the overview. Financial planning for families with a child with special needs is not some totally different universe than traditional family financial planning. It just has an additional aspect to it. So essentially, every family has one nest egg of savings, be they 401ks or other kinds of retirement plans or after-tax savings. And that nest egg has to serve many goals. We're talking about family financial planning. And there could be siblings where there would be a need for college planning. Most parents would like to retire someday. I think that's a safe assumption. And then in the context of special needs planning, there has to be a plan by which to fund the trust. And the trust, of course, is the vehicle that once you're gone or can no longer be there to care for your child, that there is a nest egg in the context of the trust that will allow for your child to maintain the standard of living that you've established for them throughout their life. And in a sense, you know, that just speaks to the end game. That's what people worry about. How is this going to play out down the road? And we're all about you know, getting it done, which I'll talk about a little bit more. We're going to talk about a letter of intent. Monty's going to go into that. Government benefits is huge. Do no harm. Do not make well-intentioned mistakes that'll compromise that benefit. And then we get into family dynamics, and family dynamics meaning siblings and who's going to be trustee and of the trust and all these kinds of issues which can lead to some conflict, and we want to get ahead of the curve on those kinds of things. And then lastly, we're going to have one homework assignment for you. And it's a homework assignment where you don't need a financial planner or you don't need an attorney. It's pretty straightforward. And it has to do with beneficiaries, which you can name on life insurance policies, annuities, 401ks, et cetera. Beneficiary designations exist outside of any will that you might have done.
So in terms of why do we have the red zone? It's, you know, one of the questions we're asking is a question, you know, parents have, when do I get started? And the simple answer is always the sooner the better. But you haven't gone through the experience, you kind of think of sort of the life stages that you and your family have gone through. And when you have that initial diagnosis that your child has disabilities, and then you're scrambling those first couple of years doing everything you can, anybody who gets something done in that time, you know, my hat's off to you. I know it's a very, very tough emotional time, et cetera. We do start seeing that parents, as the children, you know, enter the school system, that you figure, hey, we're gonna get a little bit of a break here, maybe we'll have a little bit of our time back. And again, that's a time where if you get started, great, but obviously, you know, schools aren't always the easiest thing, and in your mind you have lots of different challenges involved with that. And really what we start to see is when, you know, the kids enter into sort of the high school. And when they enter into high school, A, it's a little bit different school setting, but B, if you really kind of overlay, you have a 15-year-old child entering high school, you think about where their parents age, maybe they're somewhere in their mid-40s to mid-50s type range, and so the goals of retirement, you know, that were way, way, way down the road start, you see that, hey, that's 10, 15 years away. We better really start thinking about that and how we really start planning. To the degree there's siblings, there might be education planning, weddings, all that good stuff. And then on top of that, if your child hasn't been eligible for SSI at 18, they're probably going to be eligible. There's currently a 5-year look back, meaning that if your child has more than $2,000 in their name, they technically would be ineligible for SSI till the money is removed. And you know, you don't want to wait till 17 years and 6 months, because theoretically SSI can look back 5 years. So you start overlaying this, and that's when Jim and I really see a lot of people starting to take action. And then obviously if you have an adult child, you know, why you want to take action at that juncture is, and we'll talk about this, Jim had to do with beneficiary designations. You know, if your child is receiving government benefits, the last thing you want to see is a well-intentioned relative or some mishap where they're getting a pile of money above and beyond $2,000 being put into their name. So, you know, at that age, especially if you have a well-intentioned grandparent, friend, family, whoever it might be, you know, doing the right steps and the right planning, and then educating the rest of your family really becomes a central planning tool for down the road and avoiding miscues. Jim?
Well, this is the step one of the four-step plan that Monty and I have put together. Up on the top, not in bold print, but under the four-step planning process, it says, let's get it done. And you know, Monty and I don't need credentials to help people do that. That's just a simple process of partnering with who we're working with, or we would we would make the point, whoever you're working with, or there's a lot of good do-it-yourselfers. People can take care of things, but that's not the case with most people. So the suggestion is that you would have a partner in this, whoever it may be. That is part of what we do, and such as a friendly reminder, a little bit of a nag, you might say. But anyway, financial planning is a comprehensive, as I said, family oriented endeavor, and we essentially look at, okay, what do you have? All right, what resources do you have to begin an analysis of you being able to meet your goals? And the goals would be, fairly simply, or could be, a short version of this would be, as I mentioned before, funding 529 plans for siblings or for your child, planning for your own retirement, and then beyond that, planning for how to fund the special needs trust. All right, so those are the goals, let's just call them. Okay, so you need to then look at your inventory of assets, and that's what do you have in terms of 401ks and savings plans, and that way you get, that's what you use to first step to getting to your net worth statement. You want to look at a special needs cost estimate over the long review, and anything and everything. Real estate, what kind of debts you have, bank accounts, Social Security and pensions would be part of this gathering of information, and then insurance, there's some folks out there that believe that insurance is the single answer to funding a plan, and it can be a very useful tool. However, it's not the only answer. And but we do look at insurance, and one should have their insurance policies reviewed to see if they can be improved upon. All right, so these are just a few things that we'll also need to cover, and right now we're in the midst of a huge transfer of wealth from an inheritance perspective. The baby boomers' parents are elderly, and may or may not be the case, but that's something that we ask about and should be included in a financial plan. The other thing I'll just say about a financial plan is the intent is not to have you come away with rose-colored glasses, like everything's just great, I have nothing to worry about, nothing I need to change. The intent is not to have you worry about things, but it's to give a realistic assessment, to not make it easy to meet the goals. And so sometimes we'll make the hurdles a little higher than they really, might be. And one of those things is, I think that if it mentions inflation on here, flip that back just a little bit, there are risk aspects. And on the right column, it says risk tolerance. And, if you have 401ks, they're invested in mutual funds. And as we know, the last 6 months have not been very good for mutual funds that are in stocks. And so there's market risk. There's also inflation risk. All right, so inflation is a serious issue if you have a long-term financial plan and you're looking 15 and 20 years down the road. And then the other risk that people don't think about as much, although they are more and more, is the concept of longevity risk. In other words, our grandparents, Social Security came out and they said, well, we'll pay you lifetime income. Now, well, at the time, lifetime was age 70. All right, well, Social Security's on the hook for a lot longer period of time. And so your financial plan also has to speak to that issue. Thanks, Monty, if you go to the next one. Okay, without going into great detail, a financial plan then puts a stress test on your set of goals and objectives. And the stress test means, how much income do I want during retirement? And then in the end, how much do I, in terms of a dollar amount, need to fund the special needs trust with? And so what we take into account is things I just alluded to, what you have, how much you're going to save, what the inflation rate is, taking into account that you're going to live to a ripe old age, and taking into account that although you might have an investment portfolio that would reasonably expect to deliver 6%, and you have any exposure to stocks or bonds, they have on a year-to-year basis random returns. And so we do, this is a statistical probability analysis, all right? And that just means the probability of you succeeding in meeting your goals. And I'll just give a quick example. That first analysis there shows a 46% chance of meeting your goals. You really would want to have a better assessment than that. And let's say in this particular individual, one of the things that's holding them back from meeting their goal is they say, well, I want to retire at 62, all right? And so what we would do in terms of the stress test is retest, but retest with the individual retiring at 66. And as you can see, the probability of success went up dramatically, almost 50%, simply by pushing back the year in which that family's, the caregivers and those bringing home income would then retire. It really makes a difference. It might be, instead of saving, $8,000 a year, you're going to say during your work time, you're going to save $10,000 a year in your 401k. And so these are the components to testing your ability to meet your goals.
You mind if I get that so I don't have to?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Thanks. Sure, the other aspect of what we do is really kind of help you develop what's called a special needs life plan. And really what that is parents, we're the caregivers, primary caregivers. I mean, the sad fact of it is that most individuals, adult individuals with disabilities, live at home with their parents. Hopefully we can change that and allow our kids to get out in the community. But at this juncture, the statistics are pretty staggering. At some point in time, mom and dad may still be healthy and full of life, but you just don't have the energy level to be that central caregiver. So part of what we want to discuss today is sort of developing the plan of when you can't be that central caregiver, what are some of the steps you can do now to start planning for that, and understanding that it's a dynamic process and that what your vision is now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, may change. So we're going to cover a couple of topics in terms of getting there, and we'll go into more detail in the next couple of slides. The first one is really the special needs letter of intent, and we're going to talk about more of that. You can just see it has a lot of information about how your child is being cared for. The next segue is looking at government benefits, what's out there, making sure that your child, whether it's a child or an adult, has access and is open to the benefits. There's certain legal issues that you need to do, whether it's a special needs trust, whether it's looking at whether you want a medical power of attorney or guardianship. And again, we can kind of discuss what those are. We're not attorneys. We don't actually draw up those documents. And if you open up the yellow page, you'll see that there's lots and lots and lots of attorneys in the Baltimore, Washington area. However, what you don't see is there's not lots and lots of attorneys that really have a background and a focus on children with disabilities and addressing many of the complex things in their lives. There's closer to a handful, a little bit more than a handful. With many of our clients, we work hand in hand, and usually we'll go to this first meeting, second meeting. And the reason is not just because we want to be good guys, because most people have sort of this vision: I'm going to go to the attorney, get my wills updated, going to get my trust done, write him a check, and we're done. And unfortunately, the attorneys do give you homework, and there's some tough questions, which we'll talk about. So by being there, as Jim had said earlier, one of the things you need to do is you think about, okay, if I can't be the caregiver, who's going to take care of my children? And you might have an idea now, it might change in 3 or 4 years, but they're tough. They're tough questions, and a lot of times you have to think about them. And most of us don't like to think about our mortality, so we put this document on their desk. Other things get put on top of it, and pretty soon you had that initial meeting with the attorney, and 6-7 months later you haven't gotten back to them. So you really do need to kind of every now and then, at least we found people need to kind of get a little help in getting it done. And then lastly, we'll talk about the role of family dynamics and how that fits into the situation. So Jim, would you flip to the next slide? So the first thing, and one of the most important documents you can take care of, is a letter of intent. It's not a legal document. If you don't know what it is, I'm just going to go over it briefly. It's basically sort of how your child is accustomed to being cared for. Let's face it, with many of our kids, communication is one of the greatest challenges in life. If you're to wake up tomorrow and unable to care for your child, there are little things that you know, and maybe a sibling or a spouse would know. For instance, maybe your child needs to have a red shirt on the corner of their bed every morning. They see that, day's good. For whatever reason, if it's not there, they're getting off to a tough start. Those are things you know, but if someone had to step into your role without being told that, they don't know. Other things that are helpful is just obviously sort of the obvious: who's the doctors, what are the medications, what are the allergies, contacts at school, et cetera. So some basic information. But then you want to maybe talk about, are there things that your child enjoys doing, things that as an activity, their friends, family, or the things they don't like to do. If they're upset, if there are activities or they're just being put into a quiet room, something that kind of calms them down and puts them more at ease. The whole idea is really just to try and help somebody, take care for your child. Just think, if you were to go away on vacation for 3 days, who's going to take that role, and do they know all that you know, and what are some of the things? We're going to be sending in an email blast we have. We're just going to have a short one this week, and usually we send them out like once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks. But my wife read a really great article, thankfully it sent it to me, about how do you get started. I mean, there's a lot of information you can go in the letter of intent, and it's kind of daunting, but there's a quick article that says a couple things how you can get started, and it's a great tool. And if you don't want to be in our emails, but you want a copy, just jot a note, and we'll make sure we send you a link to the article. And then Jim, the last item on there is sort of developing a circle of trust. And what is that? Some people refer to it as a mini board. I mean, if you think about all the hats you have to wear as a parent in terms of providing the care for your child, whether, the list is endless. Expecting one person to fill that role, if you're thinking in the back of your mind, I'm going to have a big brother or little sister who's going to step into this role, it's a lot. So maybe what you might want to consider is developing a group of people who are going to be involved in different facets. Maybe one person's going to be a trustee. And maybe the individual is living in a home outside of yours or in your home. Who's going to be doing sort of the day-to-day? Is there a workplace? Just trying to get a bunch of people with different expertise. Who if they may not know each other now, you get them together and kind of explain what your vision is and introduce them. Maybe get them together once a year just to kind of make sure that everybody's on the same page. But it's a great idea. You just have a pizza or something like that, something very casual, just where people know who else is going to be involved in your child's life and kind of what their roles are going to be. So, Jim? So the legal instruments, again, as I said, we aren't attorneys, but one of the things we try and do is sit down, and when we talk about special needs trust, you'll see these, it's not just, should I get a special needs trust? Do I do the ABLE Act? Or do I do a pooled trust? There's some thought that's involved in a lot of it. As your child gets the age of 18, then you have to think of health care and who actually makes the decisions for that. So is a guardianship right? Is a medical power of attorney? As your child gets 18, if you're probably going to need somebody to be the representative payee. So there's lots of issues to kind of think about that. Either if you're there or if you're a couple years away, you want to kind of start incorporating both into your plan, into your letter of intent, so that there's some information there in the event that you aren't able to provide it. Okay, so Jim had mentioned earlier. Do you do this one, Jim?
Yeah, I'll just run through real quick. All right, so just do no evil, all right? And that means, or is another iteration of the road to hell is paved with good intentions, or the unintended consequences of very well-intentioned things typically. Monty mentioned a grandparent. A grandparent has an old life insurance policy that they have had forever, all right? And it's almost forgotten about. And then it comes to them that, why don't I make this grandchild the beneficiary? What a really wonderful thing to do. I know my son and daughter and their spouse, this will be helpful to them. And so that's a big mistake, all right? Because if they're the beneficiary, the money goes to them as an individual, all right? And now they've gotten this $25,000 life insurance policy, well beyond the $2,000 limit, and now we're talking about compromising those government benefits. And such as SSI and you want to look at the other things, the government benefits such as insurance, Medicaid, and making sure you're within the rules to be able to have access to all of this, as well as housing and transportation. Sit your back. Yes, sir.
My son's 19, and he has bipolar and Asperger's. He has skills, and he has wants, like employment. Notice that there, I think would be eligible for SSI. I think it may be important for him to get on SSI. At the same time, he's looking at possibilities of employment.
Right.
I don't think he's going to be self-supporting anytime soon. I think, given the episodic nature of his disability and the tolerance that he has.
So getting the eligibility for that, and sort of when you apply for SSI and get in it, it really opens a gateway. So maybe you don't want to take your son to work every day, but you could get something through the mobility program. So I would encourage you to do that because it does open up avenues of government programs that if you don't at least start, and you used to have to start with SSI, you're not going to, they're going to keep sending you back to that door.
Right.
Does that, now if your son does, let's say gets a job, pays, call $50,000 a year just to throw out a round number, then at that point in time, the way SSI works, he's probably not going to get an SSI check.
Mm-hmm.
But at least he would have eligibility for some of the other programs, potentially. So I'd highly encourage that.
If I have a daughter with multiple disabilities, and I do have her listed as one of the beneficiaries on my life insurance. So should I immediately move that to one of my other kids?
We'll talk about that. How old is your daughter? 10? So it could be moved. There's time, let's talk about special needs trust and some of the other options, and then we'll circle back to that question if that's not clear. Is that fair?
And if you could add on there, in the case of if a grandparent or someone does bequeath money to your special needs kid, what would happen moving forward? So does the government take that money before they are eligible again for Medicaid, or so what would happen? This is all preventative, which is wonderful, but what would happen
If you did nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just
The-
hearing also so that we have not only the preventative piece, but also worst case scenario, this is what it would look like if it were to happen.
Do you want me to answer or you want to jump in?
Well, I mean, one thing is it would be spent down, all right, ultimately. The other thing is that Monty's gonna go into, there's two kinds of trusts, all right? There's one where, that is funded by the individual themselves, the individual with disabilities, all right? Because it's their money, they have to fund it. Or the other is, another individual, a third party actually funds it, okay? And those are two different kind of trusts that Monty's
And we'll
gonna
talk about
speak
that.
to.
But the simple answer is money has to be spent down, has to be moved into a trust, and then eligibility would be reopened. And that's communicating. But we'll talk about how a little bit more. And again, if we don't answer it, raise your hand. We'll try to answer the best we can.
You said spent down and moved into a trust, or?
Or.
So let's say you get $5,000, and your child needs, I don't know, some type of walker or something that your health care won't pay, whatever, there's a deductible, and you spend $2,000 for that. It's an eligible purchase. So then you still have $1,000. You could then move that $1,000 into a special needs trust or into a pooled trust. You just have to kind of get it below that $2,000 threshold. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You can do a combination. Fast forward? Okey doke.
That's you.
So now we are going to be talking about the three biggies in terms of how can you save for your child. Let's tackle ABLE accounts first, because right now they're not operational. They will be operational. The first couple are supposed to come online sort of middle of this year. The government made a nice change right in December, where it used to be if you were a Maryland resident, you could only, if Maryland was going to offer a plan, which Maryland is, unfortunately it's not going to be available to 2017, probably in the fall, that you could only do the Maryland plan. Even though ABLE Acts are really kind of modeled after college savings plans. And in college savings plan, you can be a resident of any state and get another state's plan. So the government kind of looked and said, okay, we'll change that. So if you're a resident of Maryland and Virginia, has a plan and you want to go in the Virginia plan, you can do that. And I mentioned Virginia specifically because they should have one, they're supposed to have one operational, sort of in the middle of this year. And it's probably going to be the America funds, although we don't know exactly yet. What ABLE accounts are, is they are savings vehicles. You can put up to $14,000 a year. What's nice about those is it doesn't care where the money comes from. So if you have a son that works and he doesn't want to spend the money, he's a saver, he can put $14,000 of his own dollars in there. As parents, grandparents, beneficiaries of a plan, you can put up to $14,000 combined. So either one source or multiple sources.
Into which thing?
Into an ABLE account.
Okay.
The drawback to an ABLE account is that if the balance grows to over $100,000, as soon as it clicks over $100,000, your SSI benefits are temporarily frozen until the balance goes back under $100,000. So in other words, they would, in the month after it hit $100,000, your balance, your SSI payment would be reduced until it got below. The nice thing about an ABLE account, similar to a college savings account, is money grows in there tax deferred, and as long as it's used for an appropriate expenditure, it comes out tax-free. And we don't have sort of the whole list yet, but it's generally pretty much, medical care, pretty much like if you've ever looked at a 529 plan, they're pretty broad-based and they're meant to be flexible. That's the great thing about the ABLE accounts. They're not out, yeah.
Does a child have to be 21 to use the ABLE?
No, no. Well, to use the ABLE account?
For
No.
example, if I set
No.
up an ABLE account now
Mm-hmm.
and start putting money in it for my daughter,
Right.
am I able to access those funds for her for medical expenses? Like she has
Yes.
congenital hydrocephalus, so at any point in time, I could be looking at a neurosurgery, which I've looked at two in the last 3 years. So needless to say,
Yes.
the bills are astronomical. So if I had an ABLE account, I could potentially use those funds.
Yeah, it's for your daughter's benefit, yes, yeah, it is. Fortunately, they're not out yet, and there's going to be, it's going to have a smaller investment options, although since we don't see a plan, we don't know exact than 529s, but they still should be pretty broad-based to meet a variety of different objectives. They're just not out, so we can't really tell you exactly. A pooled trust is another option. What a pooled trust is, the nice feature about them is you're pretty much outsourcing everything. In Maryland, the First Maryland Disability Trust, you go there, there's a small upfront fee. You set it up, they'll act as your trustee, they'll act as the record keeper, with the accounting, with the tax returns, and they'll have money plugged in. And for smaller trusts, it's a nice way to go. The downside is there's sort of one investment strategy. So it's sort of, an all-encompassing one. You can't be detailed in terms of whether you want a long-term growth or whether you need income directly. To get the flexibility in how you want it managed, you would really need to look at a special needs trust. And special needs trusts are very, very flexible. What's interesting about the special needs trust and what a lot of people don't understand is it has its own entity, it has its own taxpayer ID. It is not your child's money, but it is money that has to be used for your child. So usually it would be ABC trustee for the benefit of your child's name / special needs trust. What's nice about these, they can be completely flexible, meaning if you just want them all in CDs or you want it all in sort of blue chip stocks or some kind of combination, you can do whatever you want to meet your investment objective. Money in there is safe, meaning that we've heard certain parents before say, well, I don't want to go set up a trust, I'm just going to have the sibling be the sort of holder of record, if you will. And that's a great idea. It's a low cost. Some considerations on doing that is, say your sibling's married and that sibling then gets divorced down the road. Any monies in that that are sort of for your child with disabilities would essentially be accessible to splitting down the pot, if you will. If that child is in some type of an accident and is sued, that pot of money is not safe. Versus in a trust, it's going to be very difficult to get. And there's two main, Jim alluded to this earlier, there's two main kind of trust. There's a self-settled and a third party. And the funding and how the trust is funding is very important to how you name beneficiaries. A self-settled trust, and this speaks to your question of, you have a child, it gets an inheritance, they have money in their name, what do? You can take that money and put it into a self-settled trust. get it all set up, and that money's there for their benefit. What happens upon your child's passing is that, if you're a Maryland resident, Maryland looks in and said, your child has been on Medicaid. To the degree that we've spent any money on Medicaid, Maryland would have first claim. Versus in a third-party trust, and a third-party trust is, as it says, grandparents, friends, family, whomever puts money in there other than the individual. Then upon that child's passing, in that case, whoever set up the trust, so as a parent, if you set up the trust, you have a couple of kids, you can name your other children as beneficiaries. You can name a charitable institution. Wherever you want that money to go when your child won't be able to use it is where you have that money going. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of, if you have family dynamics, which Jim will talk about, and, upon your passing, where does money go, about trying to address those issues.
Can I add one thing, Monty? To answer your question on your IRA or 401k, or maybe it was your grandparents' life insurance policy where your child directly is named, and thus it would have to go into a self-settled trust, which means the state of Maryland has first claim, okay, and any other beneficiaries most likely would be out of luck. Instead of having your son or daughter as the beneficiary, the trust is established. The third-party trust is the beneficiary, not your child.
I was gonna ask that.
Okay? The third-party trust,
They make that
the
portion go to the
correct,
trust.
because that's the
They do that on their will, anyone's will, any person who's willing money to your child. Can they have within their will, a execution, or whatever the statement is, of a third party upon their passing, a third party can be established?
correct. Yes.
You can be done within the will, and your child could be the beneficiary of 3 or 4 special needs trusts. We don't necessarily recommend it, but it can be.
Right. And just one other point, just that underlines the point that it's not your child. The trust is not your child. The trust has its own tax ID number, and your child has their social security number. They're two separate, not your child's not an entity, but they're completely separate from one another.
Sorry.
No, that's the idea here.
So we're looking at a situation where there's a settlement, and it's only in our child's name. And he's got Medicaid, and we're trying to understand how to protect his Medicaid coverage and his Social Security with this settlement coming in, from the insurance company. He was injured.
Right.
So the check will come in his name. We can't change that.
Right.
You have an attorney representing you now, right?
No.
Afterwards, we can give you the name. Afterwards, we can give you the name of a couple of attorneys you might want to consult with.
We also have a food trust. We are working with Maryland Disability Trust.
Okay.
We did that to get him some equipment that wasn't covered. But we haven't really, we did a big fundraising thing, and we got the money together and bought it, and we haven't really worked with it. We haven't put anything into the trust since.
Okay, into the pooled trust.
Yeah.
Contact them, see if they can be named as the in lieu of your son, in the trust in his name.
Oh.
He has an account with the Maryland First Disability
Yes,
Trust.
yes.
I would contact them.
Well, actually, no, it's not in his name, it's a third party, it's in my name.
Okay. I would contact them, see if that, it's going to be directly to his name. We'll give you a name of attorney afterwards to talk to. That would be my best recommendation. Okay. Before any check's cut, you can spend some time with an attorney, and they can figure out sort of the best way that simplifies things for you.
Yeah, to see if they have a solution, and if there isn't, if the check just simply, if it has to just be paid, did you say your son, directly to your son, it could then immediately go into a self-settled trust.
So create a new trust.
Correct. The self-settled, which would be his money is funding it. The only downside to that is that at his passing, the state has claim on any assets left in the trust, given that they had provided Medicaid, et cetera, for many years. If there's a balance after the state gets their piece,
Well, the
then you
Medicaid
can
already
make other
got their piece.
beneficiaries.
I mean,
Well, they're already claiming 1/3.
Yeah.
Or they're already accepting 1/3.
Yeah, okay.
Let's talk about that
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah, we can talk
Well,
more about it.
Since we are on the role of trust, and we'll talk more about that afterwards. You know, the big central, if you're going to go special needs trust, the big step is who's going to be the trustee. And I know, you know, the immediate reaction of everybody is you want somebody who knows your child, whether it's a sibling, maybe one of your spouse's siblings, close friend. That's sort of the immediate action. You want somebody who's going to know who your child is. But in making that determination, you know, the role of the trustee is they get a lot of hats to wear. You know, first and foremost, you know, they're sort of the quarterback, if you will, of doing the investing. It doesn't mean they have to do it. You know, much like you don't have to do it, you can throw somebody like Jim and I are in there, or another financial advisor, a bank, whoever. But they're the one who's kind of reporting is ultimately going to kind of make the calls on that. Two, that person has to keep records. So anytime money comes out of the trust, you have to make sure, A, what came out, B, what it was used for, and C, they're in charge of filing the tax return. And again, they don't have to actually do it themselves. They can use an accountant or so forth, and the trust can pay all these fees, but they're responsible for it. And what does that person get? They get fiduciary liability, which means if there's an issue anywhere along the line, you know, the government's coming to that person to figure out what's going on and how to make it right. Now, if it's a friend or a family, you know, they don't have to work for free. In Maryland, you know, they can, you know, they don't have to get paid, but they're entitled to a fee if they want. It's usually a percentage of assets from what, 1.5, I think it's up to. I don't recall the exact number, but they are entitled to a fee if they so choose. Another option to look at would be using a professional. You have big banks all across the country. You know, First Maryland Disability, I don't think they do separate trustee positions under there, but there are most banks will do a trustee. The nice thing about the banks, and there's a large one based out of Midwest, Comerica, that actually has what a special needs department in there, is they know the rules, they know the regulations. This isn't their first rodeo, they've done it. And so they can really kind of walk you through everything and make sure that from a monetary perspective that your child's cared for. No, Comerica is the one. First Mariner may have a trust department. I don't know off the answer. The drawback to using a trust company is twofold. One, as we've talked about before, a lot of times communication is really a central issue for our children. So if you are going to use a corporate trustee, make sure it's in your plan, and that whoever family, friend, sibling that's going to kind of be keeping a personal eye on your child knows about the trust and can kind of help bridge the gap. And two, usually the large institutions, there's going to be a minimum involved, and it's usually a substantial amount of money, you know, somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million. Some are a little bit smaller, but it's in that type of a range. And then sort of the third option, what we see a lot of people choose to do, is sort of have a family member be a co-trustee or work in conjunction with a professional trustee. So you sort of kind of get the best of both worlds in there. You know, whoever's going to kind of be the quarterback, if you will, and understands any type of financial needs, knows who to contact at the trust companies, and sort of they can help bridge that gap, if you will. And then in terms of funding the trust, you know, as Jim always likes to say, trusts take cash. That's the easy way. But they can be funded in a variety of ways. You know, insurance, if you have an insurance policy, you can name the trust. For family, friends, whoever that would like to leave something to your child, they name the trust, not the child. You as a parent can contribute money to it. If you have any type of 401ks, IRAs, things like that, you can make the trust, not your child, the beneficiary. There's a lot that can create some issues, which we won't necessarily go into today, but there are some tax ramifications of leaving sort of the work savings plans, but they can be, you know, the trust can be the recipient. I think you've got the next slide, Jim.
I think so. I think that's you.
Well, it's sort of, I'll just go over this briefly because we're getting a little low, but a couple other legal issues that you want to think about. A, mom and dad need to update your wills. You know, this is something they should be periodically looked at every 5 or 6 years, but certainly, you know, if you're naming in there, you know, who you want to have to take care of your child, you want to make sure that's updated. You want to make sure you're looking at advanced medical directives. Some folks say, I would love to set up a special needs trust, but we're not going to contribute anything to it. Why should we do it? You know, if it's a married couple or a single parent, you can say, you know what? In my will, upon my passing, we will, you know, a special needs trust is created. So the trust is created upon your passing so that you can then name, you know, that trust within the will as the beneficiary on you know, 401ks, tell relatives, and, you know, the attorney will tell you exactly how they want it kind of titled, and you can set up the trust that way. And that's the way that it's done, taken care of, but if you're not going to fund it now, it might be a good option for you to use. And then the last kind of thing is there's a big argument sort of going on now. Do you do guardianship or do medical power of attorney? And I don't know that there's a right answer. It used to be you would get guardianship. And with guardianship, the downside of that is you as a parent have final say. You go to a hospital, doctor, whatever, you have the full authority. The downside is you're really stripping your child of all their rights. And in fact, you know, somebody fresh out of prison, a felon, would have more rights than your child would at that juncture if you do the guardianship route. You know, you said your son is fairly articulate, looks to have meaningful work. He's probably very capable and probably wants to make a lot of his decisions. You know, if you're concerned that, you know, something happens that you would step in, maybe you'd look at getting a medical power of attorney as an option, or just letting him have it his own. And medical power of attorney simply means, when it comes to medical ideas, that, you know, my child has named me as being able to talk to the doctors to try and make the appropriate decisions. And so those are just some considerations. There's not a right or a wrong answer on that. That's just sort of the evolution of the process.
So, just to kind of, what I heard you say is guardianship is kind of an umbrella, it takes everything. Whereas the power of attorney is you're naming different aspects of their life that you can then have some semblance of control over or monitor.
Correct. Well, like, for instance, you know, if you have a 20-year-old child that goes to the hospital, that child is an adult from a legal perspective, and the child says, hey, listen, the doctor says, I'm sorry, we need to do an operation to repair this. If your child's 20 years old, said, you are not giving me that needle, we are not having this done, put a Band-Aid on it, it'll go away, even though that's not what to do. Medical power authority would say, you've delegated this power to me, here it is, and, you know, let's go ahead and let's address the situation. Does that answer your question? Good. Now the next one is you, Jim.
Okay, family dynamics. This is where it can get to be lots of fun, and but the main concept here is communication, and you don't want family members to find out what the plan is after you're gone and everybody's sitting there with the attorneys. So communication, as I said, is key, and don't assume that certain family members are going to want to play a role or are equipped to play a role. You know, there's this one nest egg, as we've said, that has to address all these you know, goals, and let's assume that okay, mom and dad are no longer here, all right, and a lot of families, they said, okay, we have 3 children, all right, one with disabilities. They say, well, most people would think, or the immediate response would be, well, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 is how we're going to have our will set up. But the reality might be that your child with disabilities needs more than 1/3 of your assets to go into that trust, all right? Now, perhaps half, all right? So the time to read the will occurs, and it's 50, 25, 25. And that comes as a surprise to the 2 siblings. That, you know, that can cause conflict and resentment and just, you know, other kinds of issues. Now, if that's communicated ahead of time, and typically the siblings are loving and they've been with their brother or their sister their whole lives, and you know, they can understand that. And then actually, in communicating more, we were talking about the third-party trust. All right, well, the third-party trust, the state has no claim to any of that once your child with disabilities passes. Well, beneficiaries you would name on that trust would be the two siblings. So if you go through that explanation, you're probably going to get a good response and everybody in the family on board with such a plan. And, we work with a lot of families and when we deal with investments and, you'll hear like the Dow Jones had an X return. And, we always say that most people that we work with are not up at nights worrying about whether their portfolio underperformed or outperformed the Dow Jones Industrial Average last year. What they're really up or really worried about are, what's the future going to hold and how am I going to fund this trust? Or if I don't put this all together correctly, are my, children going to be, in strife over, how things were left to them? And so communication goes a long way, and having a plan in place.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, sure, Monty.
In terms of the family dynamics and communication, really where we see more issues created as a parent, you're just assuming a sibling is going to be that central figure. Yeah. All along, you just said baby brother's going to take care of this. And you just assume it, kind of writing your letter, tend to do a great job, but you don't really talk to baby brother. And then flash forward 15 years, brother moves to Texas. And changing states, when your child's receiving services can be challenging. If that brother really was never could be living with me for the rest of my life, I didn't know that. So, the goal is when you are doing that letter of intent, and this circles back when you are talking to the attorney, is don't just assume, write down if you have, one of your own siblings or your spouse's siblings, or talk to them first, kind of explain to them, what our lives are like, and this is what you'd be signing up for. Are you comfortable with this? And making sure it's communicated. And that's where we really see a lot of the family dynamic issues also. Sorry, John.
No. And another communication issue is, we've talked about grandparents leaving monies. Actually, talk to them about that, without the big assumption, when you leave money, because maybe that's not what they're planning. But if, in fact, you were thinking about leaving something for my son or daughter, remember, this is the way it needs to be done. And otherwise, the government benefit could be compromised. And then additionally, if the caregivers or who you think are going to want to be and are caregivers, to meet periodically with them and go over things and update that letter of intent as Monty went into earlier. I think moving parts, many of them, all right? On the left side, you can see, the day-to-day things, managing the government benefits, therapists, IEPs, work, daycare, all those kinds of issues. On the right side are sort of the, technical issues and financial management, trust creation, accounting, and things like that. I'll go back to this concept of having a partner, someone to help you do all these things. That's pretty overwhelming, actually, and not that things aren't overwhelming anyway sometimes. And so having a partner will help you get things done one at a time. Check things off the list. Now, the attorney, generally you go see them and the trust is done, and wills, maybe you go back 5 or 6 years later for a review. This may sound kind of self-serving, okay, but just hear me out on this. Monty and I are financial advisors, all right? So we deal with financial planning and we also manage people's investments, all right? And so if you're doing your job and you're handling people's investments, you're talking to them on a regular basis. Hey, here's how we did last quarter, and those kinds of issues. So it allows us also to have the opportunity to say, did you go back for the second meeting that the attorney said needs to be done? And a lot of times it'll be, well, haven't done that yet. And by the way, attorneys, they don't call to set appointments, they send you a letter. Please call us to set an appointment. All right, so it's easy to get pushed to the back pile. And so a good partner, whether it be us or somebody else that for whatever reason is in regular contact with you, can say, all right, we're going to make this happen. I'm calling the attorney, and you're going to tell me when you can do this, and we're going to set the appointment. And so those are the kind of things, just an example, what a partner can do for you. Those items, we talked about insurance. Insurance, real quickly, if you have real old insurance policies, you know, they might say you might have a benefit, death benefit of $100,000, and you're paying, you know, whatever, $1,000 a year. Well, as it turns out, because actuarial tables, people's life expectancies have changed, you might be able to find a new policy where you continue to pay $1,000, but now you have a $130,000 death benefit. So in other words, the pricing on insurance has changed. You know, so this is just a demonstration of how many things have to be addressed. The last thing, all right, is your homework assignment, all right? If you take nothing away from this presentation except for this, then we've succeeded in our effort to help you get started, all right? And that's a beneficiary review. Remember, you can have all the wills in the world written, but the will has is subservient to what is when you name a beneficiary. Whatever financial institution, insurance company, 401k provider, if there's a beneficiary named, the will has no power over that. That financial institution is mandated to distribute those assets to the named beneficiaries. So, okay, you have a 401k from 2 jobs ago, which was a long time ago. And I make this example. Let's just say your ex-spouse is the beneficiary on that. Now, you've forgotten about that, and that may not be who you would ideally like to be that beneficiary, all right? So that's an example there. Or, you know, so what you want to do, or more than likely, the beneficiaries or contingent beneficiaries would be your children, and your child with disabilities is named directly, all right? And you don't want that. You want that trust to be the direct beneficiary for that child. And so anyway, annuities, pensions, anything really insurance related, typically you have to name a beneficiary. In the 403B, the 401ks, the IRAs. The other thing is, this is something Monty really uncovered, which was amazing, and is an example of why you need to check beneficiaries. Monty, would you tell that story about the Maryland state pension?
Well, just on pensions, you want to check them. In the one case that we had, the couple had been married for, I think, a little bit over 30 years. The wife was not named as the beneficiary. There wasn't a name on the beneficiary. You know, they don't know what happened. So she would have gotten a lump sum payout in that juncture.
This is from the state of Maryland.
As opposed to getting sort of an annuity stream. But it was very easy to be able to go ahead, make the changes, which unfortunately in this case proved, you know, too worthy as the husband passed away 2 years later. But it's really easy. Small call, you have an account online, go online, you can check this. It's very easy to do. The worst thing is you'll be stuck on the telephone waiting to make a call, especially an insurance company. But it's worth your time. It's a really good investment of your time. It's a way you can at least check one thing off that list and get started. Say with that, we're up to Q&A.
Well, yeah, just to underline, the mom almost missed a lifetime monthly income in lieu of getting, you know, a one-time payout. And, you know, she had 2 daughters, both with special needs that she's raising and caring for. And so it was a glaring example of, so check your beneficiaries. Call the insurance company or the 403B or the old 401k. They'll tell you who the listed beneficiary is. Then you can either have them send you the form to change the beneficiary, or a lot of them now you can just change them online. And so that's your homework assignment. So
if you have something in your child's name, whose name do they put it in?
Well, in your case, you actually have a trust set up for your child with Maryland disability.
Right, but I mean, like if my mom put something in her will and you didn't get it changed fast enough or something,
So we should let her know.
Right.
Let her know
They can talk
and
to
maybe
her
make an
about it.
amendment. And because
But,
it's.
but let's say she wanted that to go to him, so how would she do that? She'd put it in the trust's name, the name
Yeah,
of the trust?
yeah, yeah. Most attorneys, especially if the verbiage gets complicated, is if you're just gonna open up a trust in your will. So in other words, you don't really open up the trust, but it's in your will that upon your passing, then usually most of the attorneys are good to like, how exactly do you want us to put this on here? So that, we know, and then, we communicate that with the person so that they call up their work, they can enter it in appropriately. So with the First Maryland Disability Trust that you have, give them a call and say, I would like this to be a beneficiary. What verbiage do you want me to put down?
I have a question. If your child is receiving, like my husband is retired, and he's getting his Social Security,
Right.
and my daughter, who is disabled, is also getting a check
Mm-hmm.
under his Social Security, but it's in her name.
Right.
He's like the representative payee.
Right.
So-
Will that affect her if I were to apply for, because I've never applied for SSI for her because I was always told it was income driven and you make too much money, even though she has all these things in terms of her disabilities, I've never ever even applied. So
Well-
would her receiving this check, this monthly check,
She over
under
18,
her father's, is she what?
over 18 or under,
No, she's 10.
then they're gonna look at your asset level.
Right. They're gonna
So
means
it
test
wouldn't
it, as
count
they
against
say,
her.
No, well, they're gonna look to your asset level at 18.
which could eliminate her from getting
But
SSI.
But, it's always good to do that, because they may say she's not eligible now, but she'll be eligible for future considerations, meaning when she becomes an adult, age of 18, they could then look to that.
So, but it's fine for her to keep getting this money.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, you wanna keep the money directly in her name under $2,000, but I'm sure you can use a lot of that. If you have an adult child with disabilities that's receiving SSI, if you wanna get the full benefit, you have to charge them room and board
Right.
and report that.
Right.
So, you're just keeping track. If you're the designated payee or the representative payee, then you just, there's a form you have to fill out with the government every year. You're just keeping track of how that money was used. So that, and in fact, if your child is, in my daughter's case, she's getting SSI. If I pass away or when I retire, she would be eligible to get a step up in that for a survivor benefit, which would be above and beyond the SSI. That's not gonna knock her out of the box.
Okay.
Government understands those, it is complicated. That's all. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out. Thank you.